Hey everyone, I wanted to do a psychic reading on Taisha Abelar. And if you don't know who she is, well, first of all, you have to know who Carlos Castaneda is. And she was in his book series where he talks about being a sorcerer, basically kind of like a shaman. The books start out with him taking psychedelics and peyote, etc., and end with him not taking any drugs at all, but instead just being a sorcerer and controlling his own perception. And that's the gist of it. But Taisha Abelar is someone who is mentioned in his books as a witch, but also a sorceress would be probably a better way to put it. And and she was also one of his students outside of what he wrote in his books. She was one of his followers who practiced Tensegrity, which is a type of movement that you do similar to like martial arts, kind of like martial arts meets yoga is kind of what it looks like. and and she wrote a book. And after Carlos Castaneda passed away, there was a strange situation where her and the other women from the group, or I don't know if it was all of them, but some of them went on a trip. I believe it was to, it might have been Death Valley, as ironic as that is, some sort of desert area, and they just like kind of were never seen again. And so nobody really knows exactly what happened. That's not really why I'm interested in this. What I'm interested in is her authenticity of her books, and just kind of looking into like what that's all about, just who she is. I did a reading on Carlos Castaneda, so I just thought that this would be very interesting to look into as well. I grew up a Carlos Castaneda fan in high school, and most of my teen years I was obsessed with Carlos Castaneda, and I read every single book he wrote multiple times. Sorry, I don't know why. Something's wrong with my throat. But I'm going to go ahead and get into this reading for Taisha Abelar. Reading her from a frequency of like a very dark blue. I'm not reading her in present time. I'm reading her as her whole life net value. I'm saying this is a very dark blue. There's a sense of coldness to this, in the sense that there's almost like very alone kind of isolated type of sensation here with all of this. I'm seeing her being very like very calm with this blue energy, but then there's this aspect of her that's very like sharp and really like inflamed easily, I guess you could say. Let's see, what is this about? This has to do with her and social expectations, and really wanting to act upon on issues involving what people say about her and things like that. Looks like there's a lot of energy charged in that area of her life. So I want to see more about her books and like about what she wrote. So I'm seeing her, and it's like she has these truths in her mind, but she's really trying to connect dots in a way. And I see her writing her book, and it's like she's really taking her time to really make sure that everything lines up perfectly. And it's not so much about the story as it is about the concepts behind the story that are important to her. And it looks like that's the truth that she's trying to share. But the story of the book itself, it looks like she took the time to kind of make it work for the ideas more than necessarily just saying the story as it is. What I'm getting is that the people in her books, or just the story of the book, I should say her real life experience of it versus the story in the book, was much more artistic in kind of like an abstract way, and the way that things were presented was more kind of like if you went to an art gallery or you were reading poetry or something like that. But the way that she made it into a book and translated it was she was trying to translate it to something that was more like a science-y type of vibe. Like she really wanted to be more like scientific than it was, which was more of an abstract thing. And so it looks like there's a little bit of her connecting dots and really kind of changing, not necessarily lying, but like interpreting things in a certain way to really get her point across. I'm sitting here thinking about it and like being like, how do I get people to understand this truth through this story? And I don't remember, I didn't even read the whole book, to be honest, but I read a little bit of it. And I don't remember the teacher, the nagual, in that book that she wrote. But I'm getting that things were not necessarily as literal as she presented them in the book. Like, in the sense where he said that he did something to her in her past that she thought was someone else. I'm getting the sense that that wasn't necessarily as literal as she made it out to be, and there are a lot of situations like that in her work where the way that it was presented was like he was illustrating the fact that all is one and that he is more than himself, and maybe on some spiritual level beyond his lifetime he had some sort of spiritual influence within um, her spiritual contract within her life, even if it's, you know, kind of outside of the linear time. It's like some sort of influence where he was able to kind of be that person or experience being that person, or he shares the same energy or the same intention with that person, but isn't necessarily that exact same person. So in her training, it was important for her to be presented with things as like, this is how it is, everything is one, this is how we're viewing it, and from this angle, he was that person, quite literally. And so as part of her training, part of the whole training of that whole style of developing awareness, to really see it exclusively from that perspective. And in order to do that, you have to kind of present it as if he literally was that person. And so he's like, no, like literally. Because from that perspective, you could say, in some sense, it's literal. But I'm also getting that this is a way of kind of bending the logical mind, the analytical mind, in order to kind of just ignore it on some level, but it's being done intentionally to create a new narrative, and this new narrative was used as a tool to kind of make these people involved in this way of learning to really live that experience, to make it real for them, and by making it real for themselves, by like really identifying with that, in the sense that someone may change their name when they get a nickname, or when they join a group, they have a name within that group, and they identify as that, and it kind of takes away everything else, that they're really living in that world, and that really allows them to really experience it on a deeper level, but also to manifest it. And I'm not saying this as being just simply manifesting like what you kind of think or see already, but like, or just to yourself, but like other people would also see these manifestations. It's not like they're just living in their own world exclusively. So I see good things and bad things from that style. But it looks like it's definitely hard to function in society in that way. And I do see a lot of anxiety from her, and trying to defend her identity. And even though it's not, okay, so it's not really like she's defending her identity from other people. It's more that she's defending her own identity from being changed from her own perception. And that seemed to be a very big deal for her. Almost like that was more important than anything. It was like a symbol. And it's like when somebody disrespects a holy symbol, or something that you've worked for, or your family name, or something like that. That's the gist of what I'm getting here. And there's a little bit of bitterness about this too. I'm seeing her being a little bitter towards people, and there's this this very strong drive that she just has to do this. And it seems like a trap to me. It doesn't seem... Honestly, it's kind of an ego trap is what I'm saying. It's funny because it's using the ego to transcend what people would call the ego, or the old ego, I guess you could say. But it's using the ego to kind of peer into what's behind the ego. So it's like ego manipulation, and it looks like it's very useful if you can use it, but it's also very dangerous, and well, it looks like it got the better of her in the long run, and she was just very desperate to defend this sense of her reality, of how she saw things, what things meant to her symbolically, things like that. And there's, again, like, first thing that I noticed was this sense of aloneness. And there's a lot of pain here, actually, is what I'm getting. This perfect picture energy, like, just everything needs to be perfect. And there's a lot of effort involved in what she's doing, and it looks like she was able to use sheer will to really kind of, peek behind the curtain, so to speak. And looks like she was able to tap into parts of her mind that were otherwise not accessible through this intense, almost against the grain type of lifestyle. I mean, this is really, really intensely against the grain. A very difficult way of being. Unfortunately, I'm seeing it being not that great, very desperate. It's like desperate energy to be perfect. And that's not what I'm going for, but I do see it helping her in some regards. I'm going to say more about this, about her work and like her book that she wrote. Where was she coming from when she wrote this book? Let's see. Yeah, she really did have these inner truths, these awarenesses. I'm also getting that in some regards the reality of the situation was not as important as the truth behind reality to her, and to not just to her, but to this organization, if you want to call them Toltecs or whatever they were. And they would kind of bend the truth in order to express these deeper truths. And they're kind of poetic, actually. It's very poetic, very artistic expression, lots of expression. They're expressing things kind of like if you wrote a poem and you tried to turn the poem into a historical document or something like that. And so there is a lot of, enlightenment and awareness being stimulated from that. But it's also like taking mythology and, how mythology, there's a truth to all mythologies, but they all contradict themselves, so they can't all be accurate. But they all claim to be accurate, but they all have the truth behind it. And so she was more focused on that than she was on the specifics of the real world. And so I'm seeing her bending the truth a little bit. But in her mind, it's almost like she doesn't even think she's bending the truth, because it's like when you're arguing with someone and you get into a heated argument and you start kind of saying things that you don't even really believe, but you're just saying it just to kind of make your point. And I don't know if you experience that, but I experience that when I get angry. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. Because when people say things they don't necessarily mean to make their point. But she was so driven and so her convictions were so high for making these points, and they weren't bad points. They were good points. But there's a sense of desperateness, again, that has to do with this as well, about her making her points. And it's being very important to her. And so while she is saying things that happened, they're being presented in ways where, something you may experience a synchronicity, and, you tell the story to someone else, and it could sound way more, profound than it may have, your experience may have actually been. She's just really good storyteller and connecting dots So I'm going to ask a little more specifically, like, what about the exact practices, the exact things that she teaches in her books? I don't even remember the details of what they were, but I just want to know, are these practices, techniques, ways of getting more energy, etc., are they actually authentic? Let me see what comes up here. So it's basically the same thing that I was already saying, but applied to this, which is that the techniques that were being shown, that were being developed, were kind of more in the spur of the moment, just like people just like doing what kind of comes to them intuitively. And it isn't as structured and as detailed as she was presenting it, as if it's like very, very detailed. Of course it was, but it's kind of like, what is it called? Intuitive dancing? I don't know what to call it. Where people just kind of intuitively start doing something and it just feels right. And what I'm getting is that a lot of these techniques were passed down, but the way that they were performed, it wasn't so much about the details of the performance, it was more about the energy behind the performance. And the energy that was the inspiration for those movements. And so by doing those movements, you can kind of tap into that. But it's really not about the movements, it's about the energy behind the movements that makes you just kind of intuitively do those types of movements. But I do see that they were specifically taught to her in specific details, the way that she says. But there's like this coldness that I was getting at the very beginning, associated with this, that's kind of detached from the inspiration behind it all, which is much more artistic and it's much more creative. And it's not as linear, it's not as exact. It is exact in the way that an artist is very precise in what they're painting, but every artist is going to draw the same thing differently, is what I'm saying. So let me see. I just want to get a general sense of what she was about. Seeing her with a dog. She must have had a dog she was very fond of. She's like a very, very independent woman. Very independent. And it's like she had something to prove to people. That's what I'm getting. But very powerful and fierce about it. And it's funny because her fierceness and her power was kind of her strength and her weakness at the very same time. She had a very piercing look, like she was like just pierce, like her look was like piercing through you. She was so into what she did, what she focused on, whatever that may be. In this case, with her studies with Carlos Castaneda, she's so focused on that. But I'm talking about just whatever it has been throughout her entire life, reading books or coming to other philosophical conclusions and ideas and convictions about life. She was just very intense about these ideas, but she's also an introvert, is what I'm getting. So she would also keep these to herself, but she would really view the world through that lens to such an extent that that she couldn't really just kind of let go and like experience anything beyond her convictions. Kind of like if people get so caught up in politics, it's like they can't have a conversation without it being about politics. But this is her thoughts and her perception. Everything gets melded to her outlook, which is very specific. So let me see, what was her relationship with Carlos Castaneda? And she looks up to him very much. Again, with this dog, it was like she was almost able to connect better with a dog than a human, because she could kind of trust a dog, and humans kind of did whatever they wanted, and from her perception, it was like people just kind of weren't really quite there, because it's just like they didn't really see things the way she did, and so it was just she didn't connect with other people very well. So with Carlos Castaneda, she obviously looked up to him. That's what I'm seeing. Let me see what else comes up here. And while she was very fierce towards other people, she was very soft towards Carlos Castaneda. And it was like he was the only person who understood her. It was like no one else understood her, and she put up these shields. She put up a shield around her. Like her aura would get really tight and blocked off. But with Carlos Castaneda, it was the only time she could actually open up. And so, speaking of that like poetic, expressive type of energy, in the presence of Carlos Castaneda, she was able to tap into that more for herself. And it was because Carlos Castaneda had these specific ideas that were so beyond the cultural norm that resonated with her truths and what she did know, and she was onto some truth here. There's definitely a lot of enlightenment involved in this, but it was a harsh reality version of enlightenment. And it was almost a little too conservative to be as enlightening as anyone would want. It was a little like too ritualistic. It became too tight, a little too dogmatic, is what I'm saying. The relationship between them. And but she was obviously she was a full follower, like 100%. And after he died, she just kind of had him in her heart, so to speak. I guess you could say, in some sense, in her heart chakra. That's where his energy was for her. And he connected with her on a level, and she kind of wanted to leave and be able to connect with him. So I can't say exactly what happened, but I almost get the sense that she may have been able to communicate with him on a psychic, spiritual level after he had passed away, and she just wanted more of that and to be able to connect with him on a deeper level. This kind of reminds me of a love story where she was just deeply in love with him. And it wasn't like he was taking advantage of her. I think he may have been like this with more than just her at once, but it's because they were all kind of victims of society. They're all kind of in that trap that I've been describing. They all matched on that level. And so it was very intimate to experience that with someone else. And so it was very real love. It wasn't like he just like mind controlling them and manipulating them and taking advantage of them or anything like that. Although I'm not saying like he is perfect or whatever. I do see him kind of playing tricks, being a little bit tricksterish in some regards, but ultimately he had good intentions, and it was true love, but it was very complicated, is what I'm getting. And I think she may have wanted to meet him on the other side. It's possible. I'm definitely getting the sense that that's what she wanted. I don't know if she did end up taking her own life or anything like that, but I definitely get the sense that that's something she wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and end this reading. It's definitely a lot more harsh than I was hoping and expecting. I'm not saying that her books are, lies or trash or whatever. Just that, maybe some of the literal things weren't quite so literal. But I think there's some truth to her books. Same with Carlos Castaneda. I still recommend his books. I think they're great books, but at the same time, I would still say take it with a grain of salt. So, I hope I didn't offend anyone with this video. I know this was a very harsh video. And, well, anyways, that's what I saw. So, take it or leave it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and have a great day. Thanks for watching.